This surveillance footage captures the final moments in which Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh were saying their goodbyes for the night. But in the mere blink of an eye, their pleasant evening would turn into a horrific 11-hour journey through hell. What exactly happened to Hannah and Cheslin? Who did they unexpectedly meet in this car park? And what were the terrible consequences? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Now, despite the many requests for me to cover this case, Hannah's story is very sad and tragic, and with that said, viewer discretion is advised. And just to let you know, I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases here on a weekly basis, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So, with all said and done, go grab yourself a coffee. This is the case of Hannah Cornelius. Our case today takes us over to a country often covered here on Coffeehouse Crime. Welcome back to the beautiful country of South Africa. South Africa is one of Africa's most recognisable countries. It is rich in culture, holds profound natural beauty, and has some of the friendliest people you'll ever find. With its rolling grasslands, sprawling beaches, and prominent mountains, South Africa provides many sights which will please the eye. But saying that, it also has an unshakable reputation around violence and crime. This is mainly due to gang problems and femicide, and the stories of these crimes rarely get media attention outside of the nation's borders. Today, we're focusing on the town of Stellenbosch, located just east of Cape Town. Stellenbosch, also known as Ikestad in Afrikaans, is a university town surrounded by hundreds of vineyards, many of which play part to South Africa's infamous wine industry. Both of these features make Stellenbosch a very wealthy area to live in. Many oak-shaded streets are lined with boutique cafes and art galleries. And it's amongst this affluent area that we find the life of Hannah Cornelius. Hannah was born to her parents Willem and Anna Cornelius on February 12, 1996. Her father, Willem, was a magistrate for a neighbouring town, while her mother Anna was a practicing lawyer. So, as you can probably tell, Hannah grew up in a stable and professional household. And 3 years after Hannah was born, she became a sister to her younger brother, who remains unnamed for his protection. Hannah soon took on a very protective older sister figure. Her younger brother would come into learning difficulties, and Hannah was always there, happy to help him as he grew up. Being a well-rounded and kind teenager, she also enjoyed drama class, and was recognised to be exceptional at it. She also excelled in playing the piano. Safe to say, she was a creative genius. Hannah flourished in high school. She always tried her best, and she would eventually secure 6 distinction grades with an average score of 85% or more on graduation. Both popular and happy, Hannah also had a high school sweetheart, a young man named Finello who Hannah was smitten with. They would even go to the prom together, much to her father's dismay. He didn't like seeing his little Hannah growing up and away from them so quickly. There are no exaggerations to Hannah's character. She was kind, intelligent, and very hardworking. This, of course, led her to signing up for university, and more specifically, a bachelor's degree in humanities. Hannah had a curious personality with a drive to learn about the world and those around her, and fast forward 2 months, she was finally accepted into the program. In summer of 2015, Hannah began her bachelor's degree at Stellenbosch University, where she enthusiastically took to her studies. Although she was residing close by at the Irene Ladies' Residence, Hannah still needed to get to and from university. It was through these means that her 90-year-old grandmother therefore gifted her the car that she could no longer drive, an old blue and white Volkswagen City Golf. Between classes and studying, Hannah dedicated her spare time to volunteer at the local Tears Animal Sanctuary found in Cape Town. Hannah was a compassionate individual interested in the world around her. While at university, she found it very easy to make friends. She always had people to talk to due to her willingness to help others out, and her friendship circle continued to grow as she often made new connections through current fields. This was the case for a very important friend of Hannah's, as early in her second year, she would meet Cheslin Marsh, a fellow student studying theology. Cheslin was much like Hannah, a dedicated student who worked hard and related very well to Hannah's demeanour. Hannah often helped Cheslin with his studies, and Cheslin would always return the favour, but there were no romantic feelings between the two, they were just great friends to one another. Moving into the year 2017, Hannah and Cheslin were well into their second year of university, and after a long week of studying and working, the two decided to head out for Friday evening drinks with friends. The night went by smoothly, everyone was in good spirits, or at least drinking some, and Hannah and Cheslin and the group were busily playing dominoes, a popular game to play among South African students. Now, there's nothing notable to share about this evening. The conversation flowed as usual, and Friday's joyful moment slowly turned into the early hours of Saturday, May the 27th. Hannah could tell that their gathering was slowly coming to an end, and therefore decided to call it a night. But Cheslin knew that the streets of Stellenbosch were a dangerous place for a girl to be walking home alone. And so, with a skateboard in hand, he offered to walk her back to the Irene girl's residence, which wasn't too far from his own home. Hannah appreciated and accepted his offer. The two left their friends to head on home. A rather uneventful journey, they arrived at Hannah's residence without any issue whatsoever. But now, returning the concern, Hannah was worried about Cheslin getting back home alone. You know, her car was parked just around the corner, so she therefore offered to drive him back. Cheslin insisted he would be fine to ride his longboard home, but Hannah wasn't taking no for an answer. She knew that her car was far safer than a skateboard at this time of night. And so the pair stepped into Hannah's Volkswagen, driving off towards Cheslin's house of residence. At 3:23 AM on Saturday the 27th of May, Hannah parked her vehicle on a small patch of grass while the pair chatted and said their goodbyes. But as they were talking, neither of them realised the four men walking by them along the road. Very little did they know that these four men would decide to circle back onto the vehicle. They were up to no good, and Hannah and Cheslin were their new unsuspecting victims. With so many small details to this case, and out of respect, I'll be keeping the timeline of this story chronological. But using a nearby truck, they approached Hannah and Cheslin undercover, and this is where our story takes a dark turn very quickly. A sudden thud at the door would instantly rip Cheslin's and Hannah's feelings of security away. And after the passenger door was ripped open, a sharpened screwdriver and a flip knife were pressed against their bodies. The situation became very serious, very real, very fast. The four men forced themselves into the vehicle, and Hannah and Cheslin were now the real-time victims to a carjacking. It is at this point that one of the four men, Nashville Julius, leaves the other three and is no longer involved in the rest of the night's events. His role to stalk and secure a random vehicle was now complete. Meanwhile, inside the car, Hannah was shoved in between the two front seats. She was flanked either side by Vernon Whitboy and Geraldo Parsons, and in the back, Cheslin was being pinned by Eben van Niekerk. At 3:40 AM, Hannah's rather distinct Volkswagen Golf drives away with all five on board. These moments must have been agonising for the pair. Neither Cheslin or Hannah knew what they were in for, and sadly, this was just the beginning. After this surveillance footage, Hannah's vehicle wouldn't be seen for over an hour, but at 4:34 AM, it was once again spotted by a surveillance camera at a petrol station located just outside of Stellenbosch. Somewhere along this dusty road out of town, the men had stopped the vehicle and forced Cheslin into the boot of the car. They frisked him for everything he had, including his jacket and shoes. As the car arrives at the petrol station, a figure in a cream-coloured jacket can be seen in the passenger seat. A surveillance camera inside the station then captures one of the men, Vernon Whitboy, entering the shop with a wallet. He had taken Cheslin's card away from him, and was ready to rinse it using the PIN that Cheslin had provided. Unfortunately, after multiple attempts to access this bank account, no dice. It appeared that Cheslin had lied about the PIN number, an action he would pay for later. After re-entering the vehicle, the five of them then continued in their journey to Kraaifontein, a town which neighbours Stellenbosch. During this entire horrific car ride, and with Cheslin still in the boot, Hannah remained in the front of her grandmother's car, surrounded by three unknown dangerous men. She was as compliant and cooperative as possible. She didn't look around, she didn't argue, and she didn't fight. Instead, she stared straight ahead into the sprawling, dark road. The men then made several trips around the local area, stopping in frequently to visit various people, which were mostly drug pickups and drop-offs. And during all of this time, Cheslin was still in the boot. He tried to kick the hood of the car whenever he thought the men weren't around, but unfortunately, it remained shut. That was until 5:30 AM, when suddenly, the men stopped the car just outside of Kraaifontein. Hannah asked the men what they were stopping for. They told Hannah they were just going for a smoke break and they'd be on their way very soon, ready to return her car whenever they got to their final destination. It was in that moment that two of the men got out of the car, went around the back, and removed Cheslin from the trunk. They were clearly mad that he hadn't given them his PIN number. Being pushed, shoved, and forced to walk a short distance away from the car, Cheslin was then commanded to lie on the floor. It's at this point that Cheslin knew he was going to die. These men were planning to take his life. Getting onto the ground, Cheslin looked up. The last thing he saw was two men towering over him with bricks in their hands. And then, all of a sudden, everything went blank. As the morning sun began to climb over the horizon, horrors of the night were still in full momentum for Hannah, and unfortunately, it would only get worse. Driving not far from where the men left Cheslin, the group then travelled to an unused paintball course along Bottleray Road. Hannah was then assaulted by all three men, and sadly, things would get a lot worse. Next, they drove to a vineyard. Hannah was then stabbed in the neck with a sharpened screwdriver, before the group found a 40-kilogram rock and crushed her head with it. She died instantly on impact. Climbing back in the car, they left the motionless body of Hannah along the vineyard's edge. As daylight flooded the farms and savannas of South Africa, a young couple had awoken to a fresh spring weekend. Living in their quaint home along the outskirts of Kraaifontein, the peaceful sounds of birds and farm animals travelled throughout the air. But alongside these familiar sounds, the unsettling rumble of distant groaning slowly began to appear. Groaning which soon turned into exhaustive screams. Peering outside of the window, the couple spotted a young man. He was dazed and covered in blood, and, remarkably, it was Cheslin. Despite taking several bricks to the head, he was miraculously alive, and his mind was as clear as anything too. With his friend nowhere to be found, he knew he needed to seek help. Cheslin had actually stumbled down the road to find the closest residential building he could find, and the couple he came across were understandably scared. In fact, at first, they actually thought that Cheslin was a gang thug and asked him to move along, but he insisted that they call the police, and soon after that, they realised the weight of the situation. Within minutes, Cheslin was pleading with local police to help find Hannah. He described the assailants' faces, the car, where they went, anything else he could remember from the night before. He desperately wanted to help find Hannah, but tragically, it was already too late. Just 2 hours earlier, and while he was still unconscious, Hannah had already been found. She was confirmed to be dead. As the lives of Hannah's friends and family were turned upside down, police were now in a relentless search to find Cheslin's and Hannah's assailants. They knew they were looking for a small blue and white Volkswagen, and, much to their luck, they wouldn't have to search very hard, as this car had already been spotted throughout the late morning. I guess this is reflective of their stupidity and callousness, but Vernon, Eben and Geraldo had unbelievably carried on with their crime spree after murdering Hannah Cornelius. They were spotted numerous times around Kraaifontein. The men had reportedly chased down a woman on her way to work, before robbing her of her bag and her cell phone. These men were not seen again for a few hours after this, but at 1 PM that very same day, they attacked yet another woman, this time kidnapping her. Surveillance cameras captured the car at a nearby Shell petrol station. The CCTV shows the blue Volkswagen pulling into the gas station. Note that the woman they had kidnapped is in the back of the car with Eben van Niekerk at this time. This seems to be a habit of his, but Witboy then exited the car, made his way to an ATM, and attempted to withdraw money from the woman's account. They withdrew 3,000 rand, the equivalent of $200 or £150. Thankfully, their victim this time was safely dropped off along a rural road. Vernon and Geraldo then dropped Eben off at his home, giving him his share of 1,000 rand for his actions. And after this, they then tried to pawn the car off to random strangers. Very little did they know that the police had already been alerted to their movements throughout the morning, and now they were ruthlessly closing in on them as they continued to cruise around. The night began with 6 people bundled into Hannah's Volkswagen Golf, which had now reduced to only 2 men, Vernon Whitboy and Geraldo Parsons. Just 1 hour later, an undercover police vehicle spotted the missing car driving by, and as the pursuit began, a second police van joined in on the chase. Desperately trying to evade law enforcement, the men inside the blue Volkswagen Golf pulled into the driveway of a nearby private farm. Innocent bystanders are seen watching from the distance as a detective quickly exits and pursues them on foot. They continue to speed away, but fortunately, further down the driveway, a security gate blocks the blue Volkswagen from driving any further. The 2 men make a run for it, one sprinting and jumping into the river below. But this is ultimately in vain. They get themselves trapped and cannot escape from the officers, many of them who are now hot on their tail, armed and ready to fire. Their sick and twisted game was now finally over. Following their arrest, both Whitboy and Geraldo were more than happy to name the other 2 men behind these terrible crimes, which therefore led to both of their arrests the very next day. Now, I just want to take one moment to highlight how very little these men disregarded their victims' lives. These men were happy to murder 2 innocent people and terrorize a couple more for a mere couple $100. Following the news, Hannah's family were distraught, and in fact her parents, Willem and Anna, were inconsolable. The emotional pain inflicted upon them seemed to entirely consume them. Throughout the following months, and while authorities built a case against their suspects, Hannah's parents created a foundation in honor of their daughter, aptly named the Hannah Cornelius Foundation. This foundation is to help young people at risk by providing education, counseling, and guidance. Honestly, I wish I could stand here and tell you that there would be no more deaths from the hands of these 4 men, but tragically, there would soon be a second. In March of 2018, less than 1 year since Hannah's death, her mother Hannah Cornelius was found dead floating in the waters of the South Atlantic Ocean. Although deemed as an accident, Willem insists that his wife had given up with her life. He believes the pain of losing her daughter was simply too much for her to bear. She found herself walking into the ocean and, quite simply, giving up. In the wake of this tragedy, a strong case was being built against the men who killed Hannah and attempted to kill Cheslin. And in May of 2018, their court proceedings would finally begin. The evidence against them was solid. They had testimonies, confessions from both Vernon and Geraldo, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and most importantly, Cheslin, who took to the stand during court. The very rock used to kill Hannah had even been brought in as evidence. From the blunt force trauma caused by multiple bricks to the skull, he has sadly been rendered deaf in one ear. Bravely taking to the stand against his assailants, he stared at them right in the eyes. And seriously, this man was on a mission to honour his friend Hannah. Although his testimony was tearful and gut-wrenching to listen to, his family were there to support him along each and every step along the way. Although this case was clearly stacked against these 4 men, only 2 of them would actually confess to their actions. And in fact, all 4 pleaded not guilty to their crimes. Throughout these court appearances, it appeared as if these men held very little remorse for their actions. And something I simply cannot wrap my head around, but these men even smiled and laughed throughout their trial. Ultimately, Vernon Whitboy, Geraldo Parsons, and even Van Niekerk were sentenced to life in prison. And Nashville Julius, who left at the beginning of the night, was sentenced to 22 years for aid in robbery and kidnapping. Hannah Cornelius' death was the product of venomous, selfish intent. 4 men with no care for anyone but themselves took to the streets to, quote, see what they could get. With no compassion, no care, and no consciousness, their demonic behaviour resulted in the grisly death of an innocent student, and permanent physical damage to another. The level of disregard and evil in these men is, quite simply, outstanding. Honestly, I hope all 4 rot behind bars. With a story so heartbreaking, the best we can do is remember Hannah for who she was. Hannah was a caring and helpful individual, known to help anyone in their time of need, that be with studying or volunteering. And in fact, even her final night proved this, as she gave a friend a lift home. She was always her own person, someone who didn't listen to negative opinions and thoughts of others, and instead she insisted upon her own positive mentality. Through and through, Hannah seemed like a lovely person. Her family should be proud for who she became. I've already said this in a previous case, but in South Africa, an average of 8 women are killed by men every single day. Proportional to population, that's 5 times higher than the global average. Hannah and Anene and Jade and Karabo are all victims of the ongoing fight in South Africa against femicide, an ever-growing long list of senseless tragedies. To this very day, Hannah's brother, who doesn't understand what happened to her due to his severe autism, still asks when she is coming home. Cheslin surviving the attack is nothing short of a miracle, but his survival hasn't made his life easy. Due to the physical and emotional trauma caused by the attack, he has had to take a break from his studies. He has since re-enrolled into his studies and has switched over to law in the noble effort to aid those like him and Hannah. And in a way, her legacy somewhat lives on with him. Now, there is actually a current fundraiser to help fund Cheslin with his studies. I'll leave a link to the campaign down below. And for those interested in the Hannah Cornelius Foundation, which helps support children and youth vulnerable to violence, I'll leave a link down below too. This is one of the hardest cases I've experienced, and unfortunately, there is no solid way to wrap this case up. It feels like we've been left with nothing but tragedy and sadness. I really hope that Cheslin and Hannah's families find peace in their struggles moving forward. And so, finishing up here, thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. I really appreciate you folks sticking around. What are your thoughts on the case of Hannah Cornelius? Please share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as always folks, I'll see you again real soon for another video. But in the meantime, please make sure to look after each other. Thank you and goodbye.